afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on consumer duty and quality assurance. We'll just give everyone a few moments to get registered, signed in and settled with a nice cold drink. We certainly need it in a day like this. It is very warm. So we'll just give it a few minutes before we get started. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar. We'll just give it a few more minutes just for everyone to get settled in before we get going. Hello everyone and welcome to another Evaluagent webinar Wednesday. So Evaluagent is a quality assurance and people improvement platform for contact centres. My name is Chris Mouse and I'm a quality and coaching specialist with the team, and thanks to the glorious weather that we're having right now in the UK, I am also melting, but I'm certainly not going to complain too much. You know, we like to complain about these things really. But as quality assurance and compliance professionals, you're likely familiar with the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, and its regulatory requirements. But with the FCA introducing the new consumer duty, the financial services industry is expected to work towards a high standard of customer care. Now, as always, the webinar is being recorded, so don't worry if you need to drop off at any point. The recording will be made available afterwards to everyone who has registered. Now, please also feel free to ask any questions. Simply type your question into the question window that you'll see on the screen, and we'll try to answer as many as we can at the end. So today, I'm joined by Caroline Stevenson from Burness Paull. Burness Paull are an independent law firm based in Scotland who work with leading organisations across the country and internationally. So hi Caroline, it's really good to see you today. Thanks for joining.
Hi Chris, thank you.
So just tell us a little bit about yourself.
So good afternoon everyone, it's really nice to be here, and I am equally as hot, which is great because I love the sun. So as Chris says, my name is Caroline Stevenson and I head up the financial service regulatory practice at Burness Paull. And for those who don't know us, as Chris said, we're an independent law firm based in Scotland, and we actually have the biggest dedicated and full services financial services regulatory practice north of the border. But whilst we are based in Scotland, we have offices in Edinburgh, Glasgow and Aberdeen. We act for financial services clients on all matters throughout the UK and also internationally. We work with a lot of international firms who are looking to do business in the UK. And as a team, we have been hugely involved in helping our clients embed and provide for the consumer duty in both their BAU operations, but also we've been heavily involved in helping them consider this as part of their merger and acquisition or other deal activity. So given our experience, I am delighted to be here to talk to you today. Chris, I don't know, were you going to do a bit more of an intro, or do you want me to get right into it?
No, well, let me just talk over just the running order for today. So Caroline, you'll be taking us through just what is consumer duty, and I'm really excited to hear about that. And I'm being very mindful not to steal any of your thunder, so I'll say no more about consumer duty. But following your presentation, Caroline, we'll delve deeper into the role that technology, especially Evaluagent technology, can play in supporting compliance with consumer duty. But just a reminder to everyone, please feel free to ask any questions and enjoy. So Caroline, over to you.
Thanks, Chris. So as Chris said, I'm planning on covering a couple of things in my presentation today. I'm going to talk about my experience of firms embedding the consumer duty to date, and I'll also focus in on my view of the relevance of the consumer duty to those working in quality assurance. And I think it's actually really good timing for me to speak to you today, because over the last few months, as a firm and a team, we've had a number of roundtables governed by Chatham House rules, of course, all on the consumer duty. And we've had some fantastic attendance at these events. It's been great to do that in person. but we've had a broad range of financial services firms, from the sort of smallest brand new fintechs with some really cool innovative technology, and to some of the sort of largest financial institutions in the UK. So we've had the real breadth of the sector and really diverse parts of the sector, everything from life and pensions companies to sort of car finance, fintechs, to car companies themselves, and to everything in between. And it's been really, really great just to hear the issues that firms are wrangling with. And whilst I can't go into too much detail, what I can say is that we've witnessed lots of variances between the way firms are approaching the duty. For example, some firms, we're seeing that the project is very much led by the compliance team. For others, it's the legal teams that's completely got the reins and are taking the lead in the projects. We've also found that some firms are super organised. We've even had some firms say that actually they're finished. They've done everything for stage 1 and also stage 2. And we've also had other firms which are really wrangling and are really quite concerned and feel like they're struggling to even meet the first deadline, let alone think about day 2 plans. Within these roundtables as well, there was also lots of chats about firms thinking that they were already meeting the duty. This is quite a common thing we're hearing. We already do all this good stuff. Customers are always at the heart of what we do. But they're also wondering about how far they're expected to go beyond that. There's also been a lot of concerns raised about how firms can actually prove that they are compliant. If they're doing these good things, how can they actually show this to the regulator? What's the regulator expecting? How much data should they be holding? What should they be using this for? How can that be captured? And how can technology help them? These are all sort of the issues that we're hearing, and kind of the struggles and the problems that are being shared amongst the industry. We've also heard of some firms completely having overhauled their contract database, all of their existing and new contracts provide for consumer duty, and also their expectations on suppliers and other firms and entities within their supply chain. And there is some that's not even thought about that yet. That's a step too far. And I think, but despite all of these differences in approach and sort of stage on the journey, I think the good news is that almost all firms so far had rolled out firm-wide consumer duty training. All firms had a consumer duty champion, although not every firm or every representative of the firm could identify who that was. And most importantly, I think, very importantly, all firms that were in attendance at our roundtables felt that their boards were definitely taking this seriously. Everybody from the board of directors and the non-exec directors, it was sort of the hot topic on the lips of all, which is great, and that's exactly what the FCA are expecting. So the roundtables for us showed that it was as part of that, it was really interesting just to understand the different approaches. And I'm sure if we opened up this session to be an open dialogue between all of you in attendance and us, we'd definitely hear similar stories, similar concerns, and also similar fears. So I hope that background gives you comfort that all firms, doesn't matter how big or how small they are, they're still wrangling with this quite complicated topic due to its subjectivity. And there's still thoughts about how this is properly going to be provided for in the presentation. In the presentation and their operations. Anyway, I think in this presentation so far, I must have said the phrase consumer duty about 10 times or maybe more. So unless I've already sent you to sleep, or Chris sent you to sleep before I started talking, you will at least be aware of the existence of the consumer duty. So I'm not planning to go into detail on the requirements, but I still think it's really useful just to give you a high-level reminder and to confirm where I think quality assurance fits into this. So I'm going to ask Chris to flick on to my first slide. If we go on to the next one, Chris. It's on.
Yep, it's on.
Is it?
Yep, I promise I wasn't sleeping.
Is it the diagram?
Oh, this one.
Slide. Here we go. There we go. Sorry, Chris did try to give me control of the slides over this platform, but it was a step too far for my abilities from this technology this side, so I'm going to rely on him to do it for me. So apologies for that. Anyway, on this slide, you can see that there's 3 elements to the consumer duty. But before we go into those elements, I just wanted to say that you might not know this, but the UK actually introduced principles in financial services regulation back in 1990. And at that time, the FCA's predecessor, the FSA, really tried to shift the balance of its rulebook in favour of a more principles-based approach, which meant moving away from firms relying on detailed or prescripted rules towards reliance on more high-level, broadly stated rules or principles. And that's those rules or principles which were to set the standard by which regulated firms must conduct their business. And you'll all be used to principles-based regulation because we're all sort of au fait with things like TCF, etc. And so it's quite remarkable, I think, that principles-based regulation has been around for 33 years now. And now we've got Principle 12, the new Consumer Duty principle. And if you're not aware, it's on the top of the slide. A firm must act to deliver good outcomes for retail clients is the new principle. And the intention is that this Principle 12 will underpin and drive the culture and conduct changes that the FCA are hoping to achieve through the duty. So in addition to this new principle, the FCA has also introduced some cross-cutting rules. And these will support the consumer principle by setting clear expectations for firms' cultures and behaviours. And these rules will require 3 key behaviours from firms. Firms must act in good faith, they must avoid causing foreseeable harm to customers, and they must enable and support customers to pursue their financial objectives. So not much to do with the cross-cutting rules then. And as far as rules go, they're pretty subjective, and I think this is half the battle, is sort of translating those and building them into your operations. The final element of the consumer duty is at the bottom there. It's what the FCA are calling the 4 outcomes. And this is a suite of other rules and guidance linked to 4 particular outcomes that represent the key elements across the whole firm consumer relationship and supply chain. The outcomes relate to the quality of firms' products and services, the price and value of products and services, and consumer understanding and support. So turning to each of those outcomes, the aim of the quality of products and services outcome is really to ensure that all products and services sold to consumers are fit for purpose. Products and services should not only be designed to meet consumers' needs, but they should be targeted at the consumers whose needs they're designed to meet. In terms of the price and value of products and services outcome, this ensures that all products and services represent fair value, not just because they meet consumers' needs and objectives as set out in the products and services outcome, they're all linked in, but also because their price represents fair value. On to the consumer understanding outcome, and this serves to strengthen the existing communication with clients principle. And through this, the FCA are asking firms' communications to consistently support consumers by enabling them to make informed decisions about financial products and services. It also wants consumers to be given the information they need, when they need it, and presented in a way that can be easily understood. Finally, the consumer support outcome is intended to ensure that firms provide a level of support that meet consumers' needs throughout their relationship with the firm. And for me, whilst quality assurance is a key component of the principle, the cross-cutting rules, and across all 4 outcomes, I'm going to really focus today on the last outcome I mentioned, which is support for customers, and in particular, the role of contact centres in delivering and complying with this outcome. For me, I think the support for customers outcome will ensure that firms provide a level of support that meets customers' needs throughout their relationship with the firm. And this means that customer services teams will be instrumental in ensuring that consumers realise the benefits of the products and services they buy, and ensuring that they're not hindered from acting in their own interests. And it will be the quality assurance team's job to ensure that this happens consistently. So before we jump into this, I'm going to helpfully or horrifyingly remind you about how much time you have left to comply with the duty. If we jump on to the next slide, Chris. And then from the next slide, you'll see that the good news is some of these deadlines have already passed. On the 27th of July last year, we had the final rules and guidance published. Then 31st of October last year, Firms' boards or equivalent management bodies should have agreed their implementation plans and be able to provide evidence that they've scrutinised and challenged the plans to ensure they're both deliverable and robust to meet the new standards. Then we just recently, it feels like a short time ago, but it was almost 2 months ago, we had our next deadline in this chain, which was April 2023. And by this deadline, manufacturers of products should have completed their own reviews, which are necessary to meet the outcomes rules for the existing open book products and services, so that they could share these with distributors throughout the supply chain to help them meet their own obligations under the duty. And as part of this project, manufacturers should already have identified which changes they feel those products, as kind of they are in existence, what changes need to be made to them to help them continue to meet the duty. So on to the biggie, 31st of July 2023. What's that? 6 weeks away, something like that. It feels so close. But by this point, this, as you'll know, is the implementation deadline for new and existing products or services that are open for sale or renewal. Be interesting to hear how far ahead you are. I don't know, Chris, if it's worth doing the first poll question here in terms of how ready.
Yeah, let's do it. Let me just bring up the poll. Let me just select, make sure I've selected the right one. So what we would like to ask is, how confident are you that you're prepared to comply with the consumer duty? So are you very well prepared? Do you feel that you need more work, or are you not prepared at all? So we'll just give it a couple of seconds to make sure everyone's able to vote. Caroline, what do you feel would be the kind of one that most people would be selecting? Do you have a feeling?
I think the middle one. I think a lot of people are quite well down the journey, but there's still some more work that needs to be done. And it's the same with everything. Any reg change, there's always a last minute rush to get your ducks in a row. But let's see what if our audience are way more organised than we think.
Yeah, for sure. So let's. I'll give it another second or two, just to make sure everyone's got an opportunity. Is it one of those things, Caroline, where it's the kind of fear of the unknown? Maybe we're ready, but we just don't know what's going to come when the duty is actually implemented. Is there some of that, do you think?
No, I think the issue is the issue is principles-based regulation. I think it's all about the subjectivity. It's about firms being confident in their own assessment and without being able to benchmark it against competitors. And so, yeah, I think that's where the issue lies. It's just really understanding, as a firm, I've done my assessment, I'm quite confident, but is this enough? How will this look compared to another firm's product or assessment of the changes that they need to make to their products and services? So I think that's a key part of this.
Well, let's take a look and see where everyone is placing themselves. So let me close the poll and we'll take a look at the results. So yeah, 71% feel that there's more work needed in comparison to 29% that's very well prepared. I guess the good news is that no one is. There is an element of being prepared. There's no one that's saying they're not prepared at all. So that's good news, Caroline.
That is good news. That is good news, and I think that's expected. I think that I think I would have been more shocked had the kind of had it swung a different way. So yeah, I think that aligns with the rest of the market and actually what we've been seeing when we've been speaking to clients and other firms. So that's good news.
Yeah, for sure. Let me hide the results there. Thanks everyone very much for voting. Let me just hide those results and let you get back to it.
Great. So we've kind of done the whole top line there of the implementation plan, and the good news is it looks like most of you are all getting geared up for that 31st of July one. So what after that then? To be honest, I think the hard work really starts after that, because it's kind of day 2 project. It's gearing up for that 31st of July 2024 deadline, where you have to have done the whole project all over again for all your closed book products and services. And I think this is way harder because some firms have got these massively historic books that they might never even have written the business under that. They've kind of, the way that firms have sort of evolved over time and the way that they've sort of bought and consolidated books of business, there's some of these books I suspect they've got very little data, they've got very little understanding, they don't know how they were marketed, they don't know who the target market was. And whilst even for back book products, there's been reg change that has had to be implemented over the years in respect to these products to make sure that generally they are still representing fair value. This is to the next, sort of to the nth degree of that. So I think it'll be a real struggle for firms just to have 1 year period to implement that. And I could potentially see this deadline being extended for some types of products at least. So wait and see. So what next? Well, I think if we go on to the next slide, I'm going to touch on an extract there from the FCA's business plan, because I think once we get to the first deadline date in July this year, I'm really intrigued to see the evolution of this and where we will go from August. On this slide here, I think it's very clear that the FCA have set aside a huge amount of money for implementation of the Consumer Duty. In fact, on the business plan, you can see that they set aside 5.3 million to help embed the duty, but I don't think that is just going to be going towards sort of embedding the duty, because it's become abundantly clear that a big proportion of that budget will be used for enforcement. In fact, I don't know if anybody caught it, but Sheldon Mills, who is the Exec Director of Consumers and Competition at the FCA, warned that firms who ignore the duty or who pose the most harm can expect swift action. So they're not going to stand about, they're going to be monitoring this. And in fact, in a recent speech, Sheldon said, and I quote, "Our supervisory and enforcement approach will be proportionate to the harm or risk of harm to consumers with a sharp focus on outcomes. We will prioritise the most serious breaches and act swiftly and assertively where we find evidence of harm or risk of harm to consumers. In some cases, firms can expect us to take robust action, such as interventions or investigations, along with possible disciplinary sanctions." So I think it is super clear that the FCA they are taking this seriously, and they will take enforcement seriously. And I will expect there might be some Section 166 investigations that come are announced, well, announced to the extent that they can be shortly after the deadline. And I can imagine that certain firms who are not deeming to comply will definitely be made an example of. So wait and see. Anyway, if we go on to the next slide, and we can go back on track, and the next slide, I wanted to touch on how contact centres in particularly can help firms deliver the customer support outcome that I mentioned at the outset. And I wanted to touch on this because for me, contact centres are key to the delivery of this, due to the fact that your call centre agents, the staff, they're on the front line of support, and they'll be the first port of call for many customers where they're looking for support. And that sort of not face to face, but that dialogue directly, a human dialogue, is often the only way that firms can identify where there's vulnerabilities or additional support needs. So I think our call centre staff and agents are going to be so key to delivery of that outcome. And so if we break that down, I'm going to go into a few ways that I think that call centre staff have got a role to play in this. And if we go on to, oh, it is that slide, slide 8, you can see that I've popped up four different ways or elements that I think call centre staff will be responsible for. And I think it's clear that on a day-to-day basis, they do this anyway. They deliver support that meets the needs of customers, and it's going to be ever more important that they make sure that that fits their customer base, the target customers. They're delivering the type of support that meets the needs. Then call centre staff are also going to be making sure that customers don't face unreasonable barriers during the lifestyle of a product or service. And I think from what the FCA said so far, it's about that availability. It's about making sure that if customers call, they can actually get through, they can speak to someone, they can have those conversations. And that frontline work is great, but from a quality assurance side of things, you need to make sure that the monitoring of that is continually done, so that's consistent approach is taken by the staff. So quality assurance side and the monitoring is going to become all the more important to deliver the duty. And finally, on the side, the last thing, and I've mentioned this briefly already, is identifying and dealing appropriately with vulnerable customers. I think vulnerable customers and vulnerability, those additional needs, that's been a hot topic in financial services for so many years, and so it should be. It's so key that those cohorts of customers get the support and additional help that they need in order for them to help understand or interact or make best use of their products. And I think, again, call centres are key to delivery of that. And I'm going to go into that in a wee bit, but I think there's so many new types of technology that can help with all of these different ideas and things. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. I think there's going to be next level technology coming through. I've definitely heard of a few really interesting pieces of kit, and I'm sure Chris will go into their kit soon and talk about that. So I'm sure those sort of 4 items that I mentioned there, I think probably all of your firms are engaged with that in some degree or the other. And through this sort of iterative process of policy statements and guidance that the FCA have produced to date on consumer duty, and I think we'll get even more of this to come, but they've set out some examples of what good looks like. So if we go over to the next slide, we might need to skip to Chris to get to the actual excerpts of the examples, but I've pulled out some examples here from some of the FCA guidance. I'm not going to read them out, I'm just going to explain them briefly, but this is ideas of from a contact centre customer support outcome, what they deem to be good. And the top example there is all about good communication. I think we've all been there when something happens which creates a huge surge in calls. For example, if there's a high profile data breach in respect of a financial services firm that reaches the news, that can kind of obliterate resource within a call centre. We've all been there. And I think when unforeseeable events happen, which means it's more difficult for consumers to get that support, I think from now on it's clear that the FCA are really looking for firms to signpost this and to publicise any delays or signpost customers to an alternative way of getting in touch to make sure they get that support. I think we all aspire to it. We don't want customers sitting on a call and not being able to pick up for 3 hours. And I think the FCA are really wanting to target that as part of this support outcome. The middle example at the bottom, this is all about quality assurance, and it's about being proactive and identifying issues and making sure that you do put fixes in place quickly and efficiently to remedy anything that's identified. I think good customer support requires systems to work properly, and I think the FCA is very clear now that firms are expected to be able to manage these issues swiftly to make sure that they're rectified. The third example there about what good looks like, again, it's about proactivity. It's about monitoring when issues arise and reaching out to customers to find out what those issues are. It's not just sitting waiting until you get your complaints data, until you see suddenly you've had 15 complaints because customers kept getting cut off, or customers didn't know which button to press to get to the support that they need. So it's about monitoring this and proactively looking at ways to sort of understand what's happening with your customers and really identifying when additional support is needed. And often this sort of links into vulnerability as well. So it's just being at the forefront, being proactive and not waiting for complaints to do that. So finally, I wanted, before I hand over to Chris, I just wanted to set out 4 key steps that I think will be crucial to help not only embed but show compliance with the consumer duty in call centre space. So Chris, if we pop over to the next slide. So training, this is an obvious one. As I said at the start of this, as far as I'm aware, most firms that we've spoken to certainly have had their consumer duty training already rolled out. But it's not just about standing still, as with anything FS regulated. It's about continually refreshing that training to ensure that call centres continue to provide the support needs to consumers through helpful, efficient customer service. And it's also about identifying vulnerability and additional needs, and giving, I suppose, giving your frontline staff the training to be proactive and sort of the autonomy to deal with that in a really efficient way. The next box is compliance monitoring, and that goes without saying, but the first, second, third lines are all going to have a key role in ensuring that a consistent proactive support is delivered to consumers. And technology can help with this. There's so many tools out there, including things like speech analytics, and I've heard of some tech recently where they use speech analytics to monitor live calls, which then helps them detect whether there's a vulnerability there, and they can use this to actively prompt agents to ask sort of leading questions to try and get that information from customers. So I think firms are really going to have to embrace the right technology and to help them deliver the duty on a daily basis. Finally, and you'll be glad to know, this is the last thing I'm going to say, and I'm going to hand over to Chris, but it goes without saying that quality assurance is key. It's going to be key that your QA teams actively monitoring this to make sure that the consumer duty is at the forefront of everything that's done on that front line. And I'm going to pass over now to Chris, who will be covering this element in a bit more detail.
Awesome, thank you, Caroline. Do you know, that was fascinating. One of the things that I found interesting was the role that contact centres and contact centre agents are going to be playing in in making sure that there's compliance to the duty. So that training piece, I think, is so important.
Absolutely, yeah.
One other thing that I just found interesting, that where we're talking about enforcement action, it seems to me that the message is that where maybe traditionally they would have focused on the big hitters, to really levy those massive fines, that's maybe not going to be the case now. With the consumer duty, it's very much, there's a proportionate response for everyone that's not complying, which I found was really interesting.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where they go with that, but because this is such a crucial now part of the way, it's so crucial. It's really embedded into every sort of decision, everything within the supply chain of delivering financial services, products and services to customers, that who knows who's going to be the first to get it wrong, or who's going to be the first to have not got it right. So it'll be really interesting to see where this goes, but I think they definitely will take the opportunity to hammer hard on somebody just to make sure that firms stand up and pay attention and do continue to give this with the degree of attention that they're expecting.
Oh, absolutely. And I love how you mentioned technology and how that can help, because that was a lovely segue into into what we're going to be talking about now, which is that QA piece and how technology can help with that. So let me just jump over to the next set of slides. So thank you, Caroline. I really appreciate that. I'm sure everyone got a lot out of that. We'll pick up on the questions just shortly. But let's talk about consumer duty and quality assurance, because as we heard, there is a large focus on consumer duty, and of course there's a determination to avoid those potential fines and the reputation damage that could result from non-compliance. So naturally, you're going to be thinking hard about how you can mitigate the potential risk. And part of that adherence to consumer duty, firms will need to demonstrate that they have all the necessary controls and procedures in place. And for QA teams, this means collecting and analysing more data than ever before, and then being able to show the FCA that you're using that insight to enable and report on good consumer outcomes. And this is where having a strong QA approach can make all the difference, because QA teams and contact centres, as we know, they're responsible for ensuring that agents comply with the requirements when interacting with customers. So there needs to be a measure of these interactions to make sure that they're designed to meet the customer needs and they're not misleading and they are delivered fairly. And of course, this needs to be embedded throughout the end-to-end customer journey to ensure those good outcomes and that vulnerable customers are being identified and protected. So QA isn't there just to improve the customer experience, it can and does also improve compliance. And there's different pathways in a QA program. And when it comes to consumer duty compliance, firms that haven't invested in quality assurance are potentially taking a significant risk because they'll have poor visibility of performance, there'll be inconsistent training and ineffective coaching. So let's take a look at these pathways. Now, stage one, this is where everyone typically starts. It's using spreadsheets or in-house databases for quality assurance. And these are okay in the beginning, but you very quickly grow out of them and they can become more and more complex and clunky. And really, it takes a lot of manual effort and time to evaluate conversations and get basic MI. Now, let's think for a second about the number of conversations that are handled by your agents. They're handling potentially thousands of customer conversations every day. And what do you actually know about those conversations? What are the great ones, the great examples of customer service, or the bog standard ones, or the frankly troubling ones? The ones that I mean. And the thing is, it is important to know because every poorly handled conversation presents risk to the business. A quality assurance program answers those questions, but to what degree? Now, let's say, as an example, you aim to evaluate 5 customer interactions per agent per month. Now, that's a fairly standard number, but what does that number mean in terms of how much conversation coverage that is actually given us? Well, let's say that an agent handles 50 conversations per day on average. Now, realistically, it's going to be a lot more than that. But that figure, that equates to less than 1% coverage of those conversations. It's 0.5%. So over 99% of conversations are being left unchecked. Now, in addition to that, if those 5 customer interactions are being selected at random by evaluators, not only is that subject to selection bias, but there's little chance of uncovering high-risk conversations. So the result here is a wafer-thin approach to quality assurance across the entire operation that's not really mitigating risk or improving quality. Now, stage 2 is where you progress to using dedicated QA software platforms like EvaluAgent. You get real-time reporting of manual evaluations, and you can integrate with telephony and ticketing platforms. And with that, you can import all of your conversations into the one place to give you that single source of QA truth. You can increase QA efficiency with automated workflows. You can evaluate faster and find more worthwhile conversations to evaluate using the metadata. Now, the metadata is what's attached to those conversations when it's imported into your platform. Now, in this example, I could perhaps filter the department column by cancellations and focus my QA activity on those, because filtering by metadata lets you group conversations together and automatically assign them to evaluators to evaluate. So that selection bias is gone. However, if your evaluation quota remains at 5 interactions per agent per month, we're still looking at less than 1% coverage. And yet these metadata filters, they're letting us target conversations better than just a completely random approach. But can we say that we're 100% confident in duty compliance when there's over 99% of our conversations still left unchecked? Now, we could increase our quota, just increase that number, but getting that percentage any higher means having an army of evaluators doing pretty labour-intensive work. And realistically, it's just not possible. So at the forefront of quality assurance is technology. So there is a smarter approach that uses artificial intelligence, AI, along with the best bits of that traditional approach. And we're hearing about AI everywhere right now, but what does that actually mean for quality assurance? And how does that help in consumer duty compliance? Well, this is stage 3. So let's take a snapshot of an individual conversation. This is a phone call that's automatically transcribed by the platform. Now, as an evaluator, what we would typically do is we would read this conversation and we could go through it and highlight moments in the conversation that were relevant. So this moment that could suggest a lack of understanding, or this could suggest vulnerability, or we can see the agent empathized, etc. Then from here, we would also use a scorecard, and we would go through the conversation and evaluate the quality. Now, of course, in a real scenario, this scorecard would be much more elaborate than 2 basic questions, but you get the idea. Now, what's interesting is that we can use AI to do all of this for us on every single conversation that's happening across every channel. So that's given us 100% coverage. And just so you can see, this is how it looks on EvaluAgent. With that 1% coverage, it's really easy to miss non-compliant behaviour, but now we can analyse and highlight or tag those moments and auto-score every single conversation. So that's dramatically increasing our chances of uncovering issues and fixing them, and in turn reducing the risk of non-compliance. Now, in terms of auto-scoring, what we're looking at here, the level of automation that you get when you're using an automatic scorecard depends very much on how much of your original scorecard you can automate. Really, it's anything that can be scored from within the context of the conversation. Now, what we're looking at here is a consumer duty compliance auto scorecard on EvaluAgent that's measured compliance for this particular interaction. Now, at EvaluAgent, we've also produced a scorecard template that we'll make available to everyone as a downloadable PDF, as a bit of a guide for you. But where does all of this, with all of this being done automatically, where does this leave our QA teams? Well, rather than that wafer-thin approach to QA that's given us little chance of uncovering truly high-risk conversations, we can now easily identify these high-risk conversations that we need our QA team to perform deep dive manual QA and feedback on. And it's in the 100% coverage and the fully automated surfacing of those moments and auto scores that drives this part of the process. So I mentioned before that we can filter and group conversations together using the metadata, but this does have limitations. But with auto QA, we can now use the metadata and the moments along with the auto scores to filter and group high-risk conversations together. So as an example, if I wanted to find conversations that suggested customer vulnerability, and when it was suggested or when it was auto scored against a consumer duty auto scorecard, it suggested risk. And it's really that easy to find those conversations. And what we're seeing here is the conversations that I need my QA team to focus their improvement efforts on, because there's clear risk there. Now, with that 100% coverage, that's a lot of data. So we're generating a lot of insight through our QA and auto QA activities. But really, in order to deliver tangible business benefits, we need to be able to link these activities seamlessly to performance improvement workflows like one-to-ones, coaching, feedback, and training. Because otherwise, we just have a machine that's generating reams and reams of data that we don't know how to action. Like, as an example, using the data, the technology can detect areas of agent underperformance and automatically assign targeted training content for that agent to complete. So when that one-to-one happens, the conversation is about what the agent has done already and not about what they will do. So you're a few steps ahead. So right now, we've only spoken about evaluating individual customer conversations. So I want to just run a quick poll because the question I want to ask you is, what is more important to you when it comes to consumer duty and quality assurance? Is it scoring single interactions, or is it scoring customer journeys? So I'll just give you a few moments to make your selection. Caroline, from your experience, what do you feel would be the most important?
That's a good question. I think the top one obviously forms part of the second, and I think the whole journey is equally important. So I think every single interaction needs to comply, and that obviously forms part of the entire customer journey from onboarding to sort of offloading. So yeah, I'm going to go with the bottom one.
Yeah, do you know, I think it's a fair point, because I guess when you think about it, those journeys are made up of all of those single interactions. So I don't think one can be complacent in leaving those single interactions, but there's very much a focus in that overall journey, that overall experience, I guess.
Yeah, I think from a quality assurance perspective, it's the single interactions that's so important to sort of analyze and look at, and to ensure consistency across the entire journey. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess a single interaction, if that was to go wrong, that can have serious implications beyond. You can end up leaving those reviews, those poor reviews, highlighting how poor that experience was. It can do real damage. So that single interaction can make or break to an extent.
Absolutely.
So let me just close the poll. So I think everyone's had an opportunity to make their selection. So let's take a look at the results. So yeah, 81% of us are saying that what is more important in terms of consumer duty and QA, it's about scoring the customer journeys in comparison to 19% where the focus is on scoring single interactions. So that's really interesting, and it leads nicely on to the next element as to what we're going to be talking about, because I don't think it's such a surprise really, because the FCA are expecting firms to introduce appropriate friction into customer journeys to mitigate the risk of harm, and of course to ensure that customers don't face unreasonable barriers. Now, I think something that is important to highlight is that all of this data that we're collecting through those call recordings and emails and those evaluations that we're doing on single conversations, that's giving us that measurement on performance, there's a whole ton of data there. But if we can work smarter and essentially group those individual evaluations together, we can easily evaluate the customer journey. So this is an example where we're looking at a group of evaluations, single evaluations, single interactions, that gives us a high-level view as to how that customer journey was. Now, from here, we can then label that journey. So we could label this as a consumer duty journey, and we can give it an outcome. So in this example, that outcome for this particular journey is highlighted as being at risk. Now, the benefit here is that we can then report on how those journeys are performing across any area of the business. And I think that's a true value of connected workflows. All of that insight is being generated, and it's given us a much more accurate measurement of performance and compliance because of that 100% coverage. And because it's linked seamlessly to people improvement workflows, you can coach, train, and engage your agents much more effectively. So there's so much that I'm very conscious of time, so I could talk about this until the cows come home, but I'm very conscious that I want to be able to get to our questions. So I hope that was informative. Certainly from Caroline's presentation, I took a lot out of that, and I hope you guys did as well. So Caroline, shall we jump to the Q&A?
Yeah, I don't know, I haven't seen any come in. Have we had any questions?
Oh, that's okay, I'll handle that part, don't worry. So the first question that we have is from Ashley, and Ashley is saying, we have had very little information from manufacturers. It feels like it will be prod all over again, and the manufacturers are not giving the distributors the required information, which impacts the distributors' own assessments. So that's probably more a comment rather than a question.
Yeah, I think so. I've definitely heard that. I think that, excuse the bad joke, but I think some manufacturers have needed a prod to get the information out. And I think there's a difference in some manufacturers in the way that they are getting the information out there, because they're not all necessarily being proactive in delivering it. Some are sort of publishing it in certain parts of the website and things. So I would maybe engage with the manufacturers who are not engaging and try to get further information from them.
Brilliant, thank you, Caroline. We've also got another question from Sandra, and she is saying, please could you provide some examples of positive and negative friction? I think when that comes to introducing that into the customer journeys.
So I think you mentioned, I think you mentioned the friction point, didn't you?
Yes. Yeah. So I guess certainly from a QA perspective, what I would be expecting in terms of, I would imagine it's positive friction over negative friction, because the whole, and keep it right here in terms of the kind of thought behind Consumer Duty, but in terms of negative friction, there's potentially a risk there of non-compliance, because the whole idea is to make it fairer and reduce harm for consumers. But in terms of positive friction, I would imagine that's something in relation to where perhaps it's, do you know what? I'll need to think on that to get specific examples. So let me come back to you on that, Sandra. We'll send you a little email with some examples on there, and we'll do a little bit of research to get you some examples on that. Caroline, any thoughts?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think with any sort of regulatory change, there's massive amounts of friction. And I think particularly with Consumer Duty and the value side of things, there's friction between financial services firms being actually a business and looking to make a profit versus actually being a service and providing a service to customers and doing that in a way that meets the Consumer Duty. So I think if you look across all elements of it and all elements of the supply chain, there's friction all over. But yeah, I don't know if Sandra could come back with any specifics that she's looking for us to discuss in a further comment. We can come back to that one.
Yeah, for sure. So Sandra, yeah, please feel free to drop in some more comments. Another question from Michael. This is probably more a kind of QA element. So Michael works in the medical travel insurance field. Because of the medical aspect, the calls are quite complex. How accurate is the vocal analytics software? And do we expect the QA team monitoring the calls would switch to monitoring exceptions that the software can't decipher? It's a great question, Michael. In terms of the analytics software, where calls are essentially transcribed into text format, that's where the analytical element happens. In terms of the accuracy of a transcription service, it's not 100%. I don't think there's 100% achieved anywhere, but it's quite a high accuracy, I think around 80%. But the key thing is, when it comes to analytics and auto QA, it's to uncover insights, true insights that the QA team then needs to perform that deep dive manual QA activities on. Because I think we need to be mindful of the amount of data that's generated by AI and analytics, because essentially if we're just releasing all of that to an agent in terms of here's what the system has said in terms of your performance, that could be quite overwhelming. So I think the key thing is here is that as the human element, we still retain oversight. Ultimately, we're responsible for what evaluations and what monitoring is done on agents, and ultimately the results that they get. And I think that's quite a key thing, because there is that kind of train of thought at the moment where AI is going to take over everything. And certainly from my point of view, it's there to support us, because we hold the reins. We're always accountable for any decisions in that respect.
I just to add to that, I've got quite a bit of experience in sort of escalated complaints in the area of where Michael's focus is, and I think if the sort of transcript part of that type of technology can then be used to filter through to help deal with complaints much more quickly, I think that's another value that it can be used for, if it's sort of portable and it can go across other divisions other than the QA. So I think that's definitely a useful tool.
Absolutely. We've actually had some from Vicky. She's given us an example of some positive friction. So slowing up the decision-making process for customers to ensure that they're more informed before making a decision. That sounds absolutely bang on, Vicky. So
slowing the process can also cause negative friction with some customers who just want to get everything done yesterday. So more friction.
Yeah, frustration. Yeah, there could be frustration. It's finding that balance, I guess, that's the important element. So we've got another question here from China. I am trying to find services that help fintech companies who are not customer facing with supporting vulnerable customers. Do you think the FCA will be working on helping facilities? Sorry, do you think the FCA will be working on helping facilitate more in this? An example such as Relay UK? I'm not quite sure.
So, yeah, I haven't heard of that example that China mentioned, but I'm not sure if you've heard of the FCA's sandbox, but they've got lots of firms and fintechs in there where they're helping support them trials of innovative services, and they're doing that in a safe space. So there's loads of information on the FCA's website around that, and loads of there's loads of details published about the types of fintechs that are in there. From a Scottish perspective, given Chris and I are both up here, the Fintech Scotland website is a really great resource which shows all of the fintechs that are based in Scotland, and there's some really interesting technology within that as well. So have a look at their website.
Awesome, thank you, Caroline. I think we'll get time for one more, where Sandra's asking, would it be possible to share an example of a QA scorecard factoring in consumer duty? So Sandra, absolutely, we've got one available that we'll make available for download just after the webinar. That'll just kind of give some guidance in terms of what kind of things you can measure on for consumer duty compliance, and we hope that's helpful. So yeah, thank you. That's kind of running out of time, so thanks to everyone for joining us today. And Caroline, a huge thank you to you. I really found that presentation insightful and very interesting. It's such a big topic right now. So thank you. Thanks very much.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So again, thanks to everyone. I know that this is it's a really warm day today, so thanks very much for sticking with us. What we'll do is, if you'd like to know more about EvaluAgent and how EvaluAgent can help you in consumer duty compliance, please just let us know by selecting the appropriate option on the screen that you can see just now, and we'll be happy to reach out to you. So again, thank you very much for your time today, and we will look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Goodbye for now.